Call the hearing to order. Good evening, everyone. I am Michael J. Quaranta. It is September 23rd. We are gathering tonight at 6:30 via virtual means and through Zoom to hear discussion around an application that's been made to the Board of Adjustment, and the public notice will be read by the solicitor in just a moment, but for purposes of recording, I introduce myself. I'm Michael J. Quaranta. I'm the mayor of the city of Newcastle. It is 6:33 p.m. on September 23rd, 2020. Mr. Lasco, let's start with you. Just acknowledge yourself, your presence, and your title, and then we'll go to Mr. Athey and others.
Hey, I'm Daniel R. Lasco. I'm the city solicitor for the city of Newcastle.
Mr. Athey?
David J. Athey, the city engineer for the city of Newcastle.
Okay, and in attendance we have Mr. Bergstrom. Mr. Bergstrom, you want to introduce yourself and share your title?
Hi, I'm Jeff Bergstrom, and I'm the building official and fire marshal for beautiful downtown Newcastle, Delaware.
Okay, that would be all of Newcastle.
I was going to say
Delaware.
all of Newcastle, right, Jeff?
Beautiful, just beautiful, old historic Newcastle, right? Isn't that the new zip code thing?
All of it is beautiful. All right. All right. Mr. Lasco, thank you. If you would read the public notice, that would be helpful, please.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is Dan Lasco. An application has been filed by John DeMoney Enterprises, 300 West 7th Street, Newcastle, Delaware, 19720, for a property located at 300 West 7th Street, Newcastle, Delaware, parcel number 2101400396, seeking a special exception to permit the expansion of an existing self-service storage facility use in the downtown Gateway DG zoning district. For purposes of considering this application, the Board of Adjustment will hold a public hearing Wednesday, September 23, 2020 at 6:30 p.m. via Zoom conferencing. I will note for the record, Mr. Mayor, that an affidavit of publication in both the Newcastle Weekly and the News Journal were submitted as part of the record, as well as a photograph showing that the property was properly posted.
Very good, Solicitor. Thank you very much. Okay, at this point, is the applicant present or on the phone or telephonically or virtually, or does the applicant have representation?
I'm attempting to get Mr. DeMoney on the phone right now.
Okay, we'll pause for just a moment or two to see if Kim, that's the city secretary, see if she's successful in reaching the applicant.
And I need to make a correction, Mr. Mayor. I mentioned the publication was done in the News Journal. That's not correct. It was just in the Newcastle Weekly, which is perfectly legitimate.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Lasco, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. If the applicant or his representative is not present.
Hi, Mr. DeMoney. It's Kim. I'm going to put you into the meeting. Can you hold on for 1 second? Okay, I think Mr. DeMoney's in the meeting.
Okay, I don't see him on the screen, but Mr. DeMoney, are you present?
Say again. Mr. DeMoney, can you hear me? Okay, hold on 1 second.
Kim, it looks like somebody else has joined. Well, they were here, but now they're
hung
not.
up.
So in the interim, Mr. Lasko, in the event that the applicant is unable to join us, do we adjourn? Do we postpone? Do we have a hearing without that important part of the hearing? What do we do?
Well, it clearly is problematic if the applicant isn't here to respond to questions. I think we can accept his written submissions and evaluate the application based on what we know. If you have unanswered questions, if you have issues that aren't resolved by the written materials submitted, that could be problematic in the way board members vote. But nonetheless, I think the application goes forward.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Athey. Do you have any questions about that?
I think if it, like the couple that we wrestled with earlier this a month or two back were some pretty thorny issues, and if that were the case, I think I would be more in favor of just postponing it. This one honestly seems pretty cut and dried, and I'm not frankly really sure I really have any questions, so I really don't have a problem continuing. Looks like Mr. DeMundi might be calling in again, so.
That's me, and I'm going to call him now on my phone.
Boy, I hope we don't have this echo all evening. That would be.
Mr. Lasko, once he's successfully joined, I'd like you to explain the importance of his being present and why, and how that would perhaps limit us in further deliberations.
No, I think that was me. Hold on one second. I'm going to try to get to the meeting again. Hold on one second.
I don't care what they say, really.
Okay, you're in the meeting, Mr. DeMundi.
Hello, John. It's Mike Quaranta. Thanks for taking the time to join us.
No problem. I wish it'd be. I think it's time to go face to face. You know.
Yep.
Yep. We have a big room. Just invite the petitioner and anybody directly affected. They could spread out in that room real easy, and then we can get to business.
Yep. Mr. Lasko, you want to?
I gave you.
John, we've already read the public notice, and we basically wanted to call you to say, okay, we have the documentation that you've shared. Do you have anything you'd like to say? And then if you can hang around for a bit to answer any questions, that'd be helpful too.
I sent you a pleading with my position. Have you read it?
Yes.
Okay. I think it pretty much says everything I have to say. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
All right. Are there any questions? Well, do you have anybody else that you want to speak on your behalf, yes or no? Because I've got to ask Dan procedurally whether he wants to swear anybody in.
No.
Okay. Dan, do we need to swear in Mr. DeMundi?
No, he's the applicant. He's fine as he's testifying. He really hasn't testified to anything anyway. But
Okay.
Mr. DeMundi, let me ask you a question if I can. I've seen your written submission, but it doesn't seem to have addressed the points raised in section 230-21.1 D4, which is the special exception application section that you're applying under. Can you address those issues for us?
What issues do you have to? What issues do you need addressed?
Okay.
I don't have the code in front of me here.
All right. Well, let me read to you part of it. One of the things that's paramount on my
Okay.
mind. In an application to expand an existing self-service storage facility use, the Board of Adjustment shall give primary consideration to the mandatory provision of visual screening in the form of walls or fencing in combination with suitable landscaping to reasonably shield said use from the public right-of-way and property lines.
Okay. So I thought I put down there that these two new buildings are shielded by existing warehouses, so there's no visual sight from anywhere.
Well, but the code requires visual screening in the form of fencing and suitable landscaping to grant this exception. That's how I read the code. Are you proposing
Yes,
anything in that
not.
regard?
No, because in back of the buildings is a railroad track, and in front of the buildings is a warehouse. So I don't know where you would put any visual screen. You can't get any more visual screenings than that.
Well, you're talking about only the two buildings that you're proposing. What about the site as a whole? I mean, there
Oh,
were
so
two
you're talking
prior-
about you're going back on past Board of Adjustment hearings, in other words.
Well, that's true. And I went and looked at those past decisions from 2014 and 2019. And in both cases, we were talking about 4-foot-high plantings, evergreen in nature. Is that what you've erected?
Yes, I've gotten. I got these large flower pots or whatever the hell they are, and since there's no possible way I can dig up the sidewalks, unless you want me to dig up sidewalks, and it has decorative iron fencing, and it has these big flower pots every few feet with greenery.
I did a drive-by in anticipation of this meeting, and there's nothing but dead flowers in those 3 pots that you have out there.
Well, you know
that
what,
evergreen
Mr.
planting 4
Lasko,
feet
I'd
high?
like to address. Yes, I would like to address that. The whole front was wildflowers until the city and Del-Dot rode by and rounded them all. You killed all my flowers, and nobody wants to address that. Nobody wants to address that I spent years getting those plantings so it's beautiful. I have pictures of these wildflowers, 2 and 3 foot high, and Del-Dot and the city, I guess, rode by and rounded them. I have pictures of them dead brown the next day. How can we address that? Nobody wants to address that. I have pictures. You want me to send you the pictures? Be glad to send them to you. I have 4-foot wildflowers the whole length of my property, and they rode by and they rounded them. They sprayed them with weed killer and killed them all. I have a grass plot between my road and my sidewalk. They were all wildflowers, and they killed them. Yeah, I would like to address the son of a gun that did that. I would really like to address him. And I called Del-Dot, they laugh at me. I tell the city, we don't know nothing about it. No, nobody knows nothing about riding by with a truck and spraying all my flowers. Yeah, I would really like to address somebody about that.
Well,
Why don't you answer me about that, Mr. Lasko? Answer me that. You're the
I'm
one
gonna
always
answer-
after me about screening. No, you're the one answering me about screening all the time. I get these wildflowers growing over 2 years, and the authorities you represent kill them. You
Mr.
killed
DeMundi,
them.
Hey, Mr. DeMundi, you want to let me talk for a minute?
Sure.
In 2019, you agreed to the conditions of a landscape screen in the form of evergreen plantings on 5-foot centers, the height of which shall be a minimum of 4 feet, including the height of pots. That doesn't exist right now, does it?
No, you sprayed them. You sprayed the flowers that were in them.
You're
You
not
sprayed
answering my
everything.
question, Mr. DeMundi. You're not answering my
Yes.
question, are you?
What do you want me to do, Mr. Lasko? Plant trees in the flower pots?
Well,
Or do you want me
that's
to
one
tear up this whole
possibility.
side? You know what? I had the right to put these goddamn things in before you rezoned me and took away my right without compensation. Now you want to badger me every time I come in there to assert my right to build these. Let's go to goddamn court, Mr. Lasko. I want remuneration for what you did to me. You act as their goddamn lawyer instead of representing the city and me. Every time I come in there, you get on my ass. Every time I come in there. And here I am building something halfway decent, and you just got to bash me. Every time I come in there, you act as a resistance instead of acting as a city lawyer. That's what I'm pissed off about. Yes, I'm pissed off about it, because I don't have to fight you, Midori, and everybody else. You said Midori's lawyer offset what my son's legal brief said he didn't even have the right date in which that thing's got the certificate of occupancy. But yet you acted as their lawyer. Yeah, I'm mad, goddamn mad about it. If you want to go to court, let's go to goddamn court. I want my money remuneration for what you did to me. You took away my right to use my property. Let's go to court.
I don't know.
You want to go? Let's go. Let's go. No, let's go to court. Let's go. You rid by and killed all my flowers. And now you want me to answer you why there aren't any flowers? I have pictures of what was out here. It was beautiful. 3 and 4 foot high wildflowers. Why did you kill them? Why were they killed? But you want me to answer you where all the beautification is. I'd like to know where all my wildflowers are. I have pictures of them.
I don't have any other questions, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Athey, any questions?
I guess we could really, I literally drew a little straight line on the plan. Technically, it looks like a very corner of the back of the 2 proposed units you could actually see from the street, but considering the amount that's you know, already there and already visible, yeah, thank you, Kim. I call that, you know, pretty minor. Although I did, not to the same detail Mr. Lasco did, but certainly I recalled the prior Board of Adjustment hearings, you know, and knew that the landscaping was an issue then. I don't know if, I guess to Dan's point, and I guess it has to somewhat be a legal issue, if, in Dan's opinion, and Mr. Lasco, just let me say this without you getting angered, but if in Dan's opinion a prior condition isn't being met, which I believe his point, should we allow another furtherance of that same condition? And I don't know if you can necessarily tie the 2 together. Dan, I don't know if you
Well, that's not my point.
Elaborate a little bit more on your perspective of your question.
Well, I agree that Mr. Demonte has not lived up to the prior decisions where we were talking about permanent 4 foot high evergreen plantings on 5 foot centers. That hasn't happened.
I disagree with what you're saying. I said that I would plant these pots rather than try to dig up the sidewalk, and you said okay. You didn't, nothing about permanent trees. I said I would get these big pots and space them and put flower and put high plantings in them. That's what I said. No, you better go read your thing again because I've read it.
I'll quote it.
I did not say permanent. No, I did not say permanent trees inside and tear up the concrete. I said I would put pots, and you agreed to it.
Here's what I said, and here's what the board said. A landscape screening in the form of evergreen plantings on 5 foot centers, the height of which shall be a minimum of 4 feet, including the height of pots.
Yes, pots. And there's pots here.
There's no evergreen plantings.
You're saying there's no pots? Well,
no
why don't you ask the people who killed everything?
There's no evergreen plantings.
Yeah. Well, there was. You think the pots are sitting there empty with brown things hanging in them?
To answer Mr. Athey's question, I wouldn't vote based upon what Mr. Demonte has done in the past, but I would condition the grant of any building permit to erect these buildings upon doing exactly what is supposed to be done in accordance with the code and in accordance with the board's conditions, if any are granted.
Are you saying that these new units need screening from what? From where?
The code says it.
They're underneath the ground. They're underneath the ground by 8 foot from any other street. They aren't even visible. The street is 8 foot above where these buildings are.
Wait.
Did you look where these buildings are? Did you see the railroad tracks in the back and a 50-foot warehouse in front of them? And then you have to traverse through my railroad easement and my property, an 8-foot block wall, and there's the street. And these units are 8 foot below the ground in that. So what do you exactly are you saying, Mr. Lasco?
Well, I'm sorry, wait, can I interrupt? Because now I'm pretty confused. Looking at the plan, and thank you, Kim, and maybe if you can even blow that up just a little bit to the two proposed buildings. They're showing floor elevations of 10.2 and 10.4, and the road is at elevation 11 in front. So I'm not getting this, I don't know.
In front. No, you can't see anything. You can't see anything in the front. There's a 50-foot warehouse in the front. Look in the back. Those buildings are 8 foot below ground. They're 8 foot above the adjacent ground. You're telling me, and I built them?
John, I'm just looking at
They're
the
8
plan.
foot. No, they're 8 foot. They're 8 foot. So you want 4 foot screenings? And what are you going to look at? An 8 foot concrete block wall?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, and I don't understand because the plan is showing a first floor elevation of 10.2, which is, you know, for all intents and purposes, existing ground. So I just truly do not understand.
Mr. Lasco, have you gone out there and looked at it?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. Well, did you walk in on the property and see what you saw
No, I
from
didn't
standing where
trespass
the?
on your property. I did not trespass.
Well, everybody else does, and why don't you?
I don't.
Anyway, you could have walked on Well, why don't you walk out on South Street and see if you could see where the buildings were? That's That's public property. South Street. Look over the 8 foot wall, and then look down 8 foot where the buildings are.
John, where's the 8 foot wall?
Between my property and South Street.
So perpendicular to
Behind the
South
apartment house. Behind the apartment house there. It goes to the railroad track.
Perpendicular to South Street.
Yes, it follows South Street up to the railroad track.
Right, I'm sorry, I was
There's-
confusing South and 7th. Right, parallel to South. Okay, thank you. But from 7th
Any
Street,
other part of those buildings is blocked by a 50-foot warehouse. The 7th Street side of them buildings are blocked by a 50-foot warehouse. The back of them are railroad tracks with a 6 foot. The railroad tracks are 6 foot higher than the floor plan of the buildings. So where can you see anything? Where can you see anything of where these buildings are?
when you say the 50-foot warehouse, is that what your plans calls the existing stucco and frame building? Just to
The one right in front of them, yes, the one right in front of them. That's between the self-storage buildings and 7th Street. There's a 50-foot high warehouse, yes, 3 bay.
So Dan, if I can paraphrase what you said a moment ago, if your opinion is that a prior condition is not being met, that's kind of fair game, if you will, to make that a condition if we were to approve the second, or in this case, actually the third special condition. Am I?
No, you're
I can see
missing
you're
my,
kind of nodding your head no. So what am I missing here?
you're missing my point. I'm not here to punish Mr. DeMundi because he didn't follow the conditions previously issued, okay? I'm not. What I'm pointing out is that it is a predicate in our code that in order to get this special exception, appropriate screening needs to be provided along the street. That hasn't happened with the prior conditions. So now the applicant comes before us again saying, I want 2 more buildings, and hasn't offered anything in connection with the screening requirement of our code. And if he's trying to say that the existing 3 pots with dead plants in them are sufficient screening, I don't, if that's what he's proposing for the addition, for the screening on this site, I don't think that's adequate. The code says that it is our paramount consideration to consider the mandatory screening.
Well, I don't see any screening in front of the Garrison Apartments.
It's a different code
That's all
section.
I see. That's all I see is a 5-story building. There isn't even a fence in front of it.
This is a requirement to get a special exception to expand a use that's no longer permitted in the DG zone.
Well, you know what, Mr. Lasko? Why don't we go to court and find out why you had the right to rezone me without giving me any remuneration? Why don't we go to court and do that? Because I'm about ready to do it. I'm tired of coming in there and you bashing me, Midori. Every time I come in there with anything, I have to say, you act as their attorney. I'm tired of it. I'm really tired of it.
I'm sorry.
You had no right. You had no right to say Midori's lawyer superseded what I said, because he didn't. He didn't even have the right date. He didn't even have the right date of the occupancy was the 15th, 2015, not 2017. That meeting had nothing to do with occupancy. They were given occupancy in the. Yo, you know what I'm talking about. 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 When Midori filled in that property for 4 years, and you said, "Well, he's got a permit now. What's the difference? What's the difference? He has a permit now." But you want to bash me? No, but you want to bash me for a couple dead trees that you killed? You killed my whole line of wildflowers. You killed them. And now you want to bash me because they're brown? Well, you know what? Call up Roundup. They're taking lawsuits against them. I didn't put the Roundup on my flowers. And, you know, we had the hottest summer probably ever. Don't you think plants die?
Um,
I'm looking at the trustees' meadows. I don't see any flowers there, but I don't see anybody suing them because they don't cut their grass.
All right. I've been taking it all in. Mr. DeMundi, any other thoughts or comments?
You know what, Mayor, I appreciate it, but you people do what you got to do, and I think I got to do what I got to do. I'm really sick of this. Every time I walk in there, I have Lasko bashing me, yet he took away my right to enjoy my property. I think it's time he answered for that, and I think the city's time to answer for that too, because you aren't giving me the consideration I expected when I let you do that to me. You gave Gambagordes and Midori carte blanche to build these massive apartment houses, and yet you won't even give me the right to do what I had the right to do to start with. You have to hear all this stuff. Then I go to a meeting and he's almost on his knees to Midori's lawyers. He's not asking them, oh, this and that. No, he's not asking them nothing. Oh, well, Mayor, Mr. Money, we can't take his refund. No. I hear all that stuff. But I come in there and he wants to bash me for three dead plants when we had the hottest summer on record, and then somebody rides by here and rounds up the whole front of my property.
So, John,
I don't have to hear this.
No, John. Let me offer this. Okay. I wasn't here for any of the prior conversations. I'm sorry that somebody sprayed your flowers. I don't know who did
you know
that.
what, Mr. Contro? I'm going to send you pictures of it.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm going to send you pictures of what they look like.
That's fine.
When either
here's the
city, after the city or Del Dot rode by here and sprayed the whole front of my property.
Okay.
Just because I thought there were weeds.
Thank you. So here's where and this is the spirit with which I'm coming from on this particular topic. The folks across the street.
I thought this was an easy take. There isn't even any visual sight on these buildings. I said, you know what? This is just like, that Mr. Lasko's not going to have his usual rant about his goddamn trees. So this is just going to be an easy take. It ends up being the worst one of them all. You know what? I gave up my property on the premise that I would have the right to build these many storage buildings. That's why I didn't sue the city for rezoning me. And you know what? You've gone back on your word. And I have a right to go back on mine then. You took away my right to do what I was doing beforehand, yet you offered me no remuneration. That's not right. You want to hear a lawyer? You'll hear my son come down here, whether the lawyer's from Simpson Thatcher. You'll hear some lawyers then. I'm tired of it. I can't even build my townhouses down there. 2008. Your building department, down the rec, have stopped it. You'd rather have an empty lot with asphalt on it than 7 beautiful townhomes. I can't even get a permit to build them. That's wonderful, isn't it? Yet they build a 5-story apartment house across from me that I used to own that the Corps of Engineers said can never be built on. That's why I got rid of the property. I look across the street, there's a 5-story, 150 apartment unit. How did that get built? I have no idea. I have a room full of documents from Corps of Engineers. You cannot build on that property. That's why I sold it. Here we go. Who has a suitcase full of money? I guess I don't. But
Okay.
that's what I get every time I come into your meetings and I hear Mr. Lasco. Anti-city, anti-private citizen. It's just guys like Midori and all. They get a free lawyer. They get Mr. Lasco. He's our free lawyer.
Okay.
That's it.
Right.
So, Mr. Quantro, you have to do what you got to do, and I got to do what I got to do. I'm really tired of it anymore.
All right.
I built
Thank you.
these things here. They're beautiful. I put all flowers in front. I get a Mr. Lasco worried about 3 burnt trees. Wow. Mhm.
I
And I'm
appreciate-
paying this guy. I'm paying $17,000 a year in property taxes to listen to this from this guy. It's not right.
All right. Thank you for joining us tonight. I know you hadn't planned on it, but thank you for coming in and sharing your point of view.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Good night. Good night. Okay. Kim, thank you for blowing up the screen. We can go back to regular. Okay, so we have heard the applicant's presentation. We had a few questions that went back and forth. We heard questions and comments. At this point, I am prepared to go to, well, let me ask if anybody else has anything to say before we go to any public comment. Start with Mr. Athey first.
Yeah, thank you, Your Honor. Dan, a few minutes ago, you started to quote what the condition was in 2019. Do you still have that at your fingertips?
I do.
And would you mind reading it, please?
All right, the board votes to grant the special exception with the condition that the applicant, number 1, provide a continuation of an existing fence across the western entrance that's to be closed off. Number 2, landscape screening in the form of evergreen plantings on 5-foot centers, the height of which shall be a minimum of 4 feet, including the height of the pots, along the western part of the property, along the front property line, from the existing 1-story building to the Barnett property, and in reasonable equivalence on the eastern part of the property, with the exception of the existing entrance. And 3, with construction to commence within 1 year of this decision, and construction of all 3 units to be completed within 2 years. Those were the conditions.
Thank you. So I believe you said that the plants were to be at 5-foot center. I'm not going to try to scale it, but that sounds like there should have been, I'll just say, multiple pots. And Mr. DeMundy's contention, notwithstanding that somebody killed what was there, it sounds like that there's still a lack of the actual number of potted plants that should be there. Is that a safe conclusion to be drawn? 5-foot center to me means there'd be, again, I'm not going to scale it, but there'd be, I don't know, 8, 10 of these things, 12, I don't know. A lot of them, not just 3.
I think Mr. DeMundy agreed with me that there were 3 pots. I could be wrong on that. Maybe Mr. Bergstrom can chime in here.
There are a few pods. There aren't 15 of them.
Or what, okay, so we'll say 3, maybe 4, but certainly not, 8 or 10 or something like that. Okay.
So I have a couple questions, David, unless you have other questions.
No, go ahead. Thank you.
All right. So Jeff, I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
I wasn't around for, I certainly wasn't in this role during prior deliberations on Board of Adjustment hearings and requests, and not the one in question on the same subject property. But my question is this: if the code has not changed since those that decision in, I think, 2019 was rendered, or perhaps the one before that, the one that Mr. Lasko said he was not referencing. But if we look at the existing code, so let me first ask the solicitor. The code has not changed in years. Is that correct, solicitor?
Not that section of the code, since it was adopted in, I think, 2013.
Okay.
And
So,
Mr. Mayor, I also have the 2014 decision that has similar conditions. If you want me to read that, I can read that too.
no, that's okay. I guess my question then to Mr. Bergstrom is the following. If those were the conditions set, if we had conditions that were set forth, I might ask the solicitor to remind, wouldn't expect you to remember every single one of these. How was it that all of this was completed without, sufficient follow through? That's one. I think there's an opportunity here to correct some of this and make my interest would be the following. We just had a Board of Adjustment hearing not very long ago with a property across the street from this one, known as the Sailing Club. And we really hope that they were required to have a landscape plan so that there would be sufficient screening. This is one of the entrance, it is a progression of an entrance into our city. Starts, of course, back in Dobbinsville or off Washington Street, however somebody's coming in. But this is an area that used to be much more industrial. It's changing. And everything we can do to make it look better within reason, seems to be, I think, the goal that I hear from neighbors, the public. And I think that was part of the decision that was rendered with the Sailing Club a month or two ago. I would like to have seen us have a conversation about that. Not so much that which maybe didn't happen last time, but admittedly, these buildings are probably not visible from the street. I don't know that for a fact, but I've walked my dogs past there several times. And judging by the renderings of the map, the map and the drawings that he's offered, it doesn't look like that. But the fact remains the same. We're trying to create a more landscaped frontage as people traverse down 7th Street. So please share with me a little bit of background, if you will, about the thinking and or the approvals that went into the prior construction, approvals that were made by an earlier act of the Board of Adjustments, if your memory serves you clearly. And I'd like to, I think there's an opportunity here, both for Mr. DeMundi to improve his property in a good way, in that it could be looked, the appearance could be improved from the outside, and he could certainly expand his footprint with buildings that aren't going to be visible. But I think the whole goal here is a larger city endeavor. So your reactions, Jeff?
Well, to start out at the other side, the Sailing Club, you made a demand that a landscape plan be submitted and approved. It was. We had a bunch of give and take. He's got a nice landscape plan, and that's what they'll build. Once they build it, he can really be done with their building permit for the fence. But the Sailing Club probably won't be able to put their shrubs in the ground until after the first freeze, so the fence could be completed and that's it's done. Mr. DeMundy's buildings were built at the instant as soon as you let the Board of Adjustment go through, and he did add a whole bunch of pots, but I'm not so sure that the landscaping technique that the Board of Adjustment thought of was necessarily as well thought out as it might have been, because if you get any kind of an evergreen in a pot like that, you've got to have a pretty big pot, and then you've got to keep watering it, and then if we get a really bad freeze, it's going to die anyway. So it's it was kind of a tough thing to consider, but there's no direction. You said approximately 5-foot centers, so he had a bunch of them, and then they just kept attriting. So they're down to 3 now. I don't think the Board of Adjustment set any kind of condition that said he had to keep them there. He just had to have them. So and that's the issue. If you say, I mean, as long as you maintain the buildings, you have to maintain the landscape screen. But
Mr. Bergstrom, let me ask you one other question for the record. I think I know the answer to this, but I'll go ahead and ask you anyway. Do you have any knowledge that the city used any form of, herbicide to like Roundup or similar 7 to take away the vegetation that Mr. DeMundy referenced? Or do you know of anything that DelDOT may have done?
well,
That,
the DelDOT street, and I'm certain that DelDOT did it. I don't know that to a certainty, but it's a practical matter that they sprayed those weeds. They had quite a tussle with Mr. DeMundy about a bunch of his property, but that's all past now. He did have a nice looking bunch of wildflower growing in the front, and someone sprayed him and killed him, and it wasn't the city, but could have been any resident that just had a beef, or I don't know.
Okay. Any other reactions from Mr. Lasko or Mr. Athey to some of the questions or some of the comments I've made?
Mr. Mayor, Dan Lasko, just a reminder that we do have some members of the public, and we do need to open this up for public comment, but I don't have any questions otherwise.
Okay. Mr. Athey?
Sir.
Okay. All right. All right. At this point, then let's, Kim, we do have a couple members of the public. Does anybody have any particular questions? I think Mr. Gross.
You're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. We have a couple members of the public that are present. Kim, I think Mr. Gross had asked earlier if there was a time in which to speak. This would be the appropriate time. So if you want to unmute Mr. Gross, if he still has questions or comments that he'd like to make.
Okay, I'll bring him into the meeting. And I can also show street views from Google going back about maybe to 2012 if you want to see any of those. But I'll bring Mr. Gross in right now.
Thank you. Okay, Phil, this is public comment time. If you'd like to offer a couple of comments, you're welcome to.
Yes, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I guess a couple of quick things. One, when you balance out entries to the city, you have to consider, even though I assume it's outside the city limits, or it might not be, the Moores Lane storage units that were built. And they have a fence, and that's all they have. And you see the back of the storage units. So I guess if you're equating things for entrances into our city, I would seriously factor that in.
Okay, good point. Thank you.
Being one. Two, I don't always agree with Mr. Lasko. As a matter of fact, I don't often really. But one thing he did make a good point, and I guess everyone did, if you could come up with some type of prerequisite and say, listen, just like you did, Honorable Mayor, we're not here to beat you up. we want to improve the city, and that could be one of the things. Could we come to some resolution that you can bring up the prior decision and kind of vacillate it so that the board could be happy with granting the project, but like Dan Lasko said, listen, John, we gave you an opportunity. This is something that you and I can come up with, a new plan, get it on paper, get them to sign it, and say, as soon as our agreed, I mean, we didn't shove something down your throat and say, this is what we want, it's going to cost $50,000. You agreed to this. The second it's done, you can go and do what we're going to release for you to do.
Phil, I guess, Phil, my reaction to that is the following. In his application, in his submission, that's the time for him to produce that kind of a proposal. If he was going to address those needs, that would have been the time. The code, is the solicitor read, his existing code has been since, I think he said 2014. Or maybe it was 13, okay. And so it is an existing stipulation. And so he submitted a plan without any discussion about that requirement, which is in code. So that I was trying to get there with the conversation with him, but I don't think he was particularly interested.
No, I agree on that. And I think once Kim brings up the Google look, I guess my last question is, where, once you look at it, where could plantings, because yeah, Jeff had a good point, you put trees even 4 feet tall, it's going to be top heavy. And that's definitely a wind tunnel, but there's all sidewalk, and there's really not much of a way of doing plantings with any kind of variances. So I guess it's back to, like with Moore's Lane, they didn't have any opportunity. So the decorative fencing, I guess at this point is the best you can do. And if the buildings that he's talking about building are the yellow highlighted ones, I assume in the plan that Kim brought.
They are.
Yeah.
John is right that there's a wall protecting the people from the apartments. You've got a huge rise of the train tracks on the other side. And then you have that big warehouse in front. So at least on this build out, this particular build out's not going to really be a problem to anybody. It's just if you're uncomfortable granting it because of the past infraction, then it's 2 separate issues. But for this particular project,
Let me be clear on that point, though. Because I think Mr. Lasko tried to clarify that at least twice. That was not his reason, and I'm not going to put words in his mouth. He's certainly capable of speaking for himself. But what I heard him say was, "I'm not here to punish you about what may or may not have been done last time. The code is quite clear on what you're supposed to do, and your submission is void of any discussion about what you plan to do." And we just couldn't get Mr. DeMundi to engage in that kind of a conversation. I don't know, Mr. Lasko, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think I got it about right.
yeah,
I think you have the gist of it.
yeah, no, you're correct, and I got that. So if we take it just on this project alone, then there's nowhere to. There's really no.
I don't think I can only speak for myself. I think I know where you're going. The project alone by itself, given what he was requesting, I don't think I would have listened to more other opinions. That's why we have the solicitor. That's why we have the building official here. And that's why we have the city engineer as part of the 3-member panel. I would have liked to, I'd like to have heard more about the details of this particular plan. Mr. Athey had some questions about the elevations. But beyond that, had this had some form of addressing current code requirements and stipulations for landscaping,
we probably would have, in my estimation, probably would have gotten to a yes. But the conversation was cut short because it went to
No more.
Ghost of Christmas Past and then a variety of other city-related topics that are irrelevant to the consideration of this application.
Yeah, no, I agree. But again, it's only my suggestion, is somehow wrangling a time that you can all go out and confirm, or with Kim's, pictures, maybe you could get enough of a vantage point. But again, I happen to rent from John a unit, so I'm extremely familiar with how high the train tracks are, where that wall is, and how it's totally hidden, especially now with the added units that he put in there. I see no problem with that project specifically. Any more to the other property or anywhere else, then I'd question it. But that project alone, there really is nowhere to put anything that would make it any less visible than it is.
Okay, I appreciate that. And again, contingent upon all of this, though, even though, yes, the buildings are in large part hidden from view, it is a code requirement that he address the landscaping issue. That these things can't ride separately. That's part of the current code. And his application didn't address that, and he seemed unwilling to have that conversation tonight.
Is there a general idea, after looking at the views that Kim will bring up, can you guys discuss what kind of solutions to the evergreens or pots or ripping up the sidewalk? Because I can't imagine there being a variance enough to put in, like in Wilmington, they have the metal grates in the trees, and I
Right.
don't know.
Well, I appreciate the comment. Do you have any other, you want to add any other questions? Do you have any other questions?
Appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, is there anybody else, Kim? Is there anybody else who's raised their hand? Have any other?
No, nobody else has their hand raised.
Okay, all right. We'll give that another minute. I would say this. I think the burden is, unless somebody wants to inform me otherwise, I think the burden is frankly, on the applicant to propose solutions and make sure that their application is compliant with all the different code and regulatory and policy requirements that are in existence. I don't want to necessarily engage in something, and I don't feel like I want to jump in and try to make this better. If the applicant wants to initiate that process, I'm certainly willing to engage. I don't know if that results in another application or a continuation or whatever, but anyway, that kind of sums up my view for the time being. So, okay, if there's no other public comment, then I want to, I'll take a motion to close the hearing unless there's anything else in closing that the other two members would like to say at this time.
Not I.
Okay. Is there a motion? Okay. In that case, is there a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All right. The hearing is hereby closed. Is there discussion at this point?
Yeah, may I? I know typically you ask Dan or I to go. Would you mind, Mr. Mayor, if I made a comment question first?
Please. Sure.
Okay, I guess in somewhat answering to Mr. Gross, and I did, while we were talking, Dan, I apologize for putting you on the spot earlier. I did find the meeting minutes from the 2019 meeting, and that was when Mayor Gambacorta was chairing. So no, Mr. Quanti, you were not there, or you're certainly not presiding. And that it kind of refreshed my memory a little bit. The reason we settled on the potted plants was because of, Mr. DeMundi made a compelling argument that to do anything otherwise, ripping up concrete or doing things to that effect was just, very expensive, very draconian. And so I don't think any of us, and I can't speak for Solicitor Lasco and certainly can't speak for former Mayor Gambacorta, but I don't think any of us were necessarily comfortable with where we landed it, but there was really no other decent way, reasonable way to address the landscaping. Jeff, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot a little bit. You introduced it earlier when you used words to the effect of, you weren't really sure the board's conditions were I don't know, I forget what word you used, appropriate or what have you. And I know I'm really putting you on the spot here, and I apologize. Would you care to opine here? Like I say, we kind of landed on the potted plants for lack of a better approach, but I'd really be curious to hear what your perspective on it might be. Jeff?
Sorry,
There you go.
just took
That's
a
all right.
while to mute there. Putting it from my perspective, you did a great job over at across the street at the sailing club. You had a pretty well defined what you expected out of the landscape plan. For Mr. DeMondes, it was awfully nebulous. He put a number of pots out there with trees in them, and it satisfied it for the instant, I believed. And then it wasn't maintained. So, and I realized that Mr. DeMonde was pretty upset with whoever sprayed his weeds and killed them. But you really, if you want to put a condition on an approval for this one, for God's sake, say that his plan for screening has to be something that's approved by a landscaped architect or something. If the board doesn't want to specifically say dig holes, put trees, or something to that effect, because there's nothing. Mr. DeMonde is not an arborist, and neither am I.
All right. Thank you. I guess I'm inclined, this is tough, actually.
So, Mr. Acy, let me ask you to pause for one
Yeah,
second.
please, I'm sorry, maybe I'm jumping the gun here.
No, that's all right. Mr. Lasco, what are the options? Do we have to dispose of the application favorably or unfavorably? Can it be set aside? What are the range of options that are before the board?
Well, the board could certainly entertain a motion to continue the hearing to give time for the applicant to submit a landscape plan or whatever other additional information the board wants to do. That would be something relatively unprecedented, but there's nothing in our code that says we couldn't do that. So I think you have some tools here if you wanted to do that. So that's one option. Another option is to decide the application as submitted with or without conditions. So I think the real question is you either make the decision or you give him a chance to submit some kind of a landscape plan. If he will be willing to do so, I don't know. He wasn't very open to dialogue there, other than to say that Dan Lasco had killed his weeds.
All right, appreciate that. All right, Mr. Athey, back to you. I think I got the answer that I was looking for. Do you have any other comments, Mr. Athey? I kind of jumped in front of you there.
No, actually, that was helpful. Again, this is really tough. I think I might have even said it at the onset that, and Mr. Gross, I think also more or less said it, that these two new buildings themselves, the corner of one of them you might be able to see from 7th Street, but by and large they are, I don't want to use the word screen, let's just say not visible from the street, other than that one really minor, and I'm going to call that a de minimis. It's just not huge, but I'm not comfortable recommending an approval or agreeing to an approval knowing the intent of the DG district and the specific mention that the solicitor quoted really at the top of the meeting, and knowing the gate. I mean, it's called Gateway for a reason, and the aesthetic requirements. I guess I'm really struggling with. We went down this path about 1.5 years ago, and clearly what we came up with as a condition. either didn't work or the applicant didn't follow through, and you don't necessarily want to go down that path. Jeff actually kind of got me thinking a little bit more, and this would actually be a more draconian step. So if we made it a condition, I don't know if Mr. DeMundi would follow through with it or not, but instead of just coming up with some sort of a nebulous, I believe is the word you used, Jeff, and again, I'm not disagreeing with it, criteria, is maybe we make it conditioned, or depending on how Dan would want to, maybe we continue it and tell the applicant this is what we want as a continuation. I think it's kind of 6 to 1, half dozen the other, but maybe make it some sort of a requirement to have a professional, be it in LA or somebody, that, professionals are paid to deal with difficult circumstances. This is one, somebody talented enough and imaginative enough could probably come up with something that would meet the intent of the DG district and wouldn't, be, hopefully would not be considered unreasonable. Maybe I just kind of talked myself into it a little bit, is some sort of a resubmitted plan that just goes a step farther than we went in 2019.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. All right. Okay. I think at this point, I'm going to make, I'm going to make a motion, and Mr. Lasko, I may struggle through this because I'm going to actually, I am going to take the unprecedented step of proposing that we postpone further deliberations on this, and ask that the city send a letter to the applicant outlining the section in code that is not addressed in his application, and invite him to amend his application if he so chooses. And with that, we might have something to talk about and have further, and then further consider the application at a different time. He's under no obligation to respond to that or do anything. And I guess maybe we should put a time frame on that that's both reasonable for him and also reasonable for the city, so that the application doesn't remain open indefinitely. So my own view would be maybe 60 days or maybe 90 days, but not much longer than that, so that, again, it gives him enough time to think about it, gives some certainty for the city as well. And that's just for purposes of actually having a follow-up conversation, should there be one, if you will, almost kind of a response.
Mr. Mayor,
Yep, Mr. Lasko.
without commenting on the motion, might I rephrase it for you to say that this would be a motion to continue the hearing for up to 60 days, to give the applicant time to submit a professional landscape plan to address the code section requirements.
That would be fine. That'd be fine. All right. I would make that motion.
If I may ask for clarification, professional landscape, Adam, that basically a professional landscape architect or some other, I don't know, qualified arborist or something like that. Is that, basically what you're saying?
Well,
I mean, there are professional certifications, so I don't want to, narrow it too much.
I get it, and it's the mayor's motion, not mine. So I kind of looked to him I'm looking for some clarity on what do we expect to get back from the applicant if we request for this. Is it going to be something hand-drawn on a napkin, or is it going to be something that really gives scaled details?
Yeah,
gives planting types, like you saw with the application at Johnson Way recently, where they described, Norway folk pine, blue spruce, whatever. They were describing the number of trees, the caliper of the trees, the species of the tree. They had a plan that absolutely lets you know what you were going to get. Now, How he wants to do it would be up to him, it strikes me. So I wouldn't necessarily want to insist that it be from a registered LA landscape architect, but that's his call. I just don't want to get a back of the envelope thing back because I don't think that's helpful to the board's deliberations.
No,
Agreed.
and that's not, and honestly, I don't think that's in his interest. I don't think that's in the larger city interest, and I don't think that's in, I'm not trying to ask him to spend in excess, but I do think it has to be a professional plan. And so frankly, I do think it should be from a licensed professional, because I think if it's not, then I think we're all kind of swinging at the air here. And I don't want to waste his time, and I don't want to further frustrate him, and nor do I want to waste my time or the time of everybody that I'm looking at on the screen right now.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, my point was more, let's not, and I would be very comfortable, and at this point, I'm actually forgetting what the language was, but like professionally prepared or words to that effect. I was just trying not narrow that who is who's the professional, just because you get into certification issues and things along those lines. So if I could offer a friendly amendment to be like professionally prepared or words to that effect.
Well, professionally prepared, but David, I'm almost of the mind that it should go. What are the layers of certification? I'm not interested in having him, try to contract with the state arborist, because that's extreme. But I certainly acknowledge Mr. Lasco's comments. I also don't think it's in Mr. DeMundy's interest. I don't think it's in, frankly, the best use of our time or his to have something just come in on the back of an envelope either. So
Agreed.
I don't know if
Totally
saying
agree.
just professional is good enough, or we need to provide a bit more direction.
Would you like me to read the motion?
Please.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Motion to continue the hearing for up to 60 days to give the applicant time to submit a professional landscape plan to address the code section requirements.
All right, and I would amend that further then to say where it says professional landscape plan drawn, submitted by, I don't know if it's actually submitted or prepared by a licensed landscaped architect or firm.
Should it be, the only reason I'm raising this is because this was a requirement of the prior decisions. Should it be evergreen based, or can it be wildflowers again that die in the winter? You see my point?
Yeah, I think, well, it would be unfair to treat him differently than we asked people across the street. So what were the requirements, please? I think we have to be consistent. And so we asked the sailing club to do certain things, okay? And Jeff, maybe you recall, what were did we stipulate, I know we talked about greenery because I raised holly bushes because they were worried about trespassing and things like that. But what level of specificity? I think we should, it's a good point, but I think we should request no greater, but no less than the same kinds of direction and standards that we asked for the sailing club. I mean, it's literally across the street.
Was that a question?
Yes.
For me? Okay, yes, we did. You did say that the plan had to be acceptable to the building official. So believe it or not, I consulted the state arborist. I learned more about evergreen plantings than I ever wanted to know, their lifespan, their heights, and we were able to find a species that was agreeable to everyone and wasn't subject to certain kinds of blight. And that's what's going in across the street. I would hope that if we just had it was so much easier at Johnson Way when you demanded a professional, a registered landscape architect to prepare the plan. They can certainly read the code. They'll come up with something that's compliant. And as you guys noticed, there was just about nothing to say about the plan that they submitted. It far exceeded our wildest dreams. So.
But we're back to Mr. Lasco's point, which was, if we don't say, we could get raised flower beds, and if the idea is to have screening along the lines of what we asked the sailing club property owners to do, then we need to be more specific.
But the code says it's a reasonable screen, doesn't it? A landscape architect's going to do that.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I found the minutes from the sailing club, and I'll quote it real quick. Et cetera, et cetera. And then it says, the landscape plan shall include non-deciduous plantings that will reasonably screen the fence.
Okay.
So.
Sounds like evergreens to me.
I'll add one more thing that I think should be in the motion, and that is that whatever the plan is, it should be sustainable. Because that, to Mr. Bergstrom's point before, that was the problem with what we had required previously. He put out pots, he put out plants, and they died. And so it wasn't a sustainable, maintained plan. And that's why the screening has failed in that instance. The building's up, you're not going to tell him to take down his buildings, but the screening has failed and there's nothing the city can do about it at that point. So I think if you're going to go in this direction, the landscape plan for evergreen-based plantings, non-deciduous-based plantings should be sustainable.
And I would say, to the solicitor, I agree with that. And I think that also ought to be part of our code. And if the code section does not say that, I think, because I mean, the same would go for the neighbors at the sailing club. You know, what we want is something that's, you know, we don't want people to something maybe no fault of their own. The species that they pick, it's a tough growing year. They plant it in the spring, which is not ideal. You want to do it in the fall. You know, they don't, you know, some things just don't work. And then they go, oh, well, we tried, we're done, we're out. You know, no, that's not the intent. And all of a sudden now you've got a clear view in that case across the street of a parking area, which is not the larger goal of the community. And that was not the intent. So sustainable, if it's not in the underlying statute and the requirement, should be. But I would say to Kathy, you know, the amendment would be the language that Mr. Lasko, I have to repeat it one more time, that, you know, was used in the sailing club decision, but specifically says non-deciduous, and I would say evergreen trees, making it very clear.
Mr. Mayor, would you mind if I take a stab at stating the motion? This will be your motion. I'm just trying to articulate it so
That's
that
fine.
Kathy can get it down right in the minutes.
That's fine.
And if I'm incorrect, please correct me. It's your motion. But the way, what I'm hearing is you saying that you're making a motion to continue this hearing for a period of up to 60 days to invite the applicant to submit a sustainable evergreen-based landscape plan prepared by a landscape architect consistent with the terms of section 230-21D4, which is the code section at issue for this particular this special exception.
I think that sounds, I think, reasonable, and then the applicant can decide for himself whether he wants to go, if he wants to follow through with that, or perhaps not. But that to me seems like an opportunity to continue the discussion, and we're basically outlining the parameters, and they're not different from that which has been requested of others, especially the folks immediately across the street from him, in particular. I really do. You know, one of the reasons when I was on the Historic Area Commission was we needed to kind of eliminate the consistently inconsistent nature of some of the decisions, and I think we've done an admirable job, and I would appreciate that, because I think it'd be a more consistent application in this regard too. So, Kathy, did you catch all that?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
All right. Discussion about the motion. Mr. Athey, looks like you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, there is an inconsistency that we can't really do anything about. The sailing club was a grassed surface we were talking about. And again, I'm back to the 2019, and for that matter, I guess the initial, I think it was 2014, that there is no grass in this area we're referring to. And I'm certainly not a landscape architect. I'm not sure. Absolutely agree with the intent, and I generally agree with the motion, but I'm not sure how doable it is without, again, ripping up concrete and, things along those lines. And I don't know if that was the intent of either you, Mr. Mayor, or Mr. Lasko, or are we all kind of hoping maybe some sort of surface planters can accomplish this goal. And let me rephrase it. If a surface planter won't accomplish this goal, I just don't see it. I just don't think it's going to get done. I also do want to note, Mr. Gross chimed in a little while ago. It's actually also another valid point. And I think Mr. DeMundi brought this up in 2019. That's a public sidewalk in front of his property. And the more space that gets taken up is the less space. And I don't know where the right-of-way line is and exactly, but I think it's a potential consideration that might, or maybe even would, affect the viability of the plan.
Well, Dave, that doesn't mean he couldn't put the plantings behind the fence on his own property.
Well, okay, valid point.
Frankly,
Or
that's what
concrete carve-outs there to plant plants. It certainly increases expense. I'm not looking to increase his expense. I'm just saying I think there are options for a sustainable landscape plan that will do the trick of what the code requires, which is reasonable screening.
Okay.
That's not what we have here now for this. I mean, you got to remember, and Dave, you pointed it out, the point of the downtown gateway zoning here is to provide that walkable visual appeal as one enters the city from this vantage. And this particular section was adopted as a compromise to allow Mr. DeMundi to continue with his self-service storage facility, which isn't otherwise permitted by the DG zone, and in fact allow him to expand it. So, council, it strikes me, went to great lengths to try and accommodate his existing business, and all we were really asking for was some proper screening out front.
Yeah.
So, and that's what we didn't get.
Yeah, no, and again, we're coming at this from the same angle, I believe. Let me maybe restate why I even said that a moment ago. If our common goal here, and I think it is to improve the aesthetics of this location, if it can be done with surface treatment, surface plots or whatever, to me, that's an expense that I'm hoping Mr. DeMundi is willing to incur. If it can't viably be done that way, and it becomes a much more, I'll use the word draconian, or destructive, digging up asphalt or whatever, and he just says, the heck with it, I'm not even going to do it, then we're left, or the city is left with what's there now. So I'm definitely in favor of setting the condition, but I just want to make sure, since none of us are LAs, that are we setting a condition that has a reasonable expectation for being met? Because if it isn't, then it may not be frankly, a great approach if it's just going to end up going nowhere.
I think that there are, I think, and this is why I think the benefit of having a landscape architect involved, if, the history of the DeMundi family, they were in, of course, the concrete block business. And, I could see how you could build a raised bed of sort, and it could be a couple feet high, it could be a couple feet deep, and could provide for plenty of soil. And it could be decorative, and it could be behind the fence, and it could also serve as a barrier so nobody drove into your fence. And so there are ways in which to, and again, I don't want to play junior landscape architect. It's not what I do. You would not want, I have a wonderful backyard because we deployed professionals. But anyway, okay, so we have a motion on the table. Any other discussion about the motion?
You need a second.
We do.
I second it.
Okay. All right. Let's call for a vote. All right. Mr. Lasko.
I'm a little torn because the applicant really came unprepared. That being said, it is not my intention to punish the guy. It is not my intention to prevent him from developing his business. look at what this code says, and I expect code compliance, just like everybody else in the city has to comply with the code. So with that in mind, and with the spirit of trying to give him every opportunity to comply with code, I will vote in favor of this motion.
Mr. Athey.
Thank you, Your Honor. I too will vote in favor of the motion. I believe these, as the code allows, we are empowered to establish reasonable conditions upon granting of a special exception. I personally believe this is a reasonable, we've struck a good balance between the just not getting something on the back of a napkin and getting something professionally prepared. And I think we've talked it through well enough that, you know, this seems like something that could be done without a huge cash outlay. And again, I'm back to that, certainly the intent of the DG district. And back to Mr. Mayor, and you're probably going to say this in a moment, and this would make it reasonably consistent with the prior, or I guess there was one since, Board of Adjustment hearing for a property essentially right across the street. So I think this is a reasonable condition, and I support the motion.
Mr. Mayor, may I add something? I think the building official should be the one to write Mr. DeMundi and advise him of the nature of the motion. I don't think it should be a board member doing that.
Okay, that's fine. Letter come from Mr. Birch or from Mr. Berthel. That's fine. Okay, and I'm gonna vote for my own motion just because I think that I want to give the applicant an opportunity to reconsider and look at the existing code, which has been in place for a couple of years, and amend the application. He's under no obligation to respond. He's under no obligation to spend a dime of his money if he doesn't want to address the existing requirements in law. He's not being really given any advantage, or he's not being disadvantaged in ways we would treat anybody else. And I think that, you know, my expectation for what that plan would look like would be something akin to what we're trying, the larger community goal of improving the Gateway, and in some ways what we've asked of the Sailing Club. So let me just pause it. So anyway, that's so I'm going to support the motion, and therefore the motion carries on a 3-0 vote. Okay, I think we've done our business. The chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, the motion carries, and our hearing and this proceeding of the Board of Adjustment is hereby concluded. Thank you, everybody, and have a good night.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.